Hello, everyone, and welcome to my podcast, The Plague Eldritch Anecdotes. I am your guide, Ariana, and I am new to the podcast game, so bear with me. This podcast will focus on unique paranormal encounters and stories and situations people may be in. That includes Am I the Asshole? Am I Overreacting stories, real or fake? Um, yeah, we're going to dive into it. Also, if you have any stories you'd like to share, drop a comment and I can let you know where to send your stories to. A little bit about me before we jump in. I love everything odd and spooky. I'm a mom, so if you hear any crazy background noises, it's because of my kids and it's the holidays, so there's family in town. And right now I am currently in school to obtain my associate's degree in mortuary science. That includes funeral directing, embalming, you name it. I'm going to do it as people pass on to the next life. But yeah. Also, my podcast will probably incorporate my journey as I am navigating school and trying to obtain my licenses. So, with that, let's jump into the first story. So, our first story comes from Reddit, and it is r/paranormal encounters. Under any morticians out there have some significant stories to share. And this story comes from a user posted 2 years ago called Dusty Old Bones. Having been in the business for 6 years now, I can tell you there's a lot less paranormal activity than you might expect. Truthfully, nearly none. That said, there was one weird night. I was on call in case anyone passed during the night. I got a call from a nursing home at around 1 a.m. I've been to this facility dozens of times. I was familiar with everything there. Nothing weird ever happened before. I find a nurse who points me to the correct room. I find it and I go in. On the bed was a smallish old woman with your standard grandma build. Not overweight, but plump at the hips. Just by looking at her, she was probably around 130 pounds. I turn away from the woman on the bed to grab my gurney and get it ready to make the transfer. When I did, I saw this sparkly gray cloud up in the corner of the room. It looked like when you get lightheaded, how your vision goes fuzzy with the spots of lights. But when I looked at another part of the room, I didn't see the sparkly cloud. It was just up in that corner. There was a very dim light in the room, and staring at the cloud wasn't helping me make sense of it, so I turned back to my work. I got the gurney, positioned it next to the bed, got the woman wrapped up in the sheet, and proceeded to try and pull her over. Now, someone her size should just slide right over with very little resistance, but she didn't budge. I checked the edge of the bed to see if there was something blocking the way, but it was just a leveled mattress. I tried again, bracing myself first and giving her a really good tug. Nothing. It was like she weighed 400 pounds, but that didn't make sense. So I used a different maneuver and she started to move toward me, but it felt like someone was pulling her back from the other side. I just pulled, and as soon as half of her body was on my gurney, she suddenly moved like someone her size should. I was pulling so hard, I almost yanked her off the gurney. I got her all buckled in, covered her with a quilt, and rolled her out to the van. Got her loaded, hopped in the front seat. Because I have no idea what happens after death, I treat my dead people just like I would anybody living. In other words, I talk to them politely. The name I have been given from the nursing home was Ruth Smith, so I said out loud, "All right, Ruth, let's get you out of here." At that moment, I heard a loud voice in the back of my head say, "It's Alice." I didn't hear it with my ears. I heard it with my brain, if that makes sense. So I said, "Okay, Alice. Alice it is. Let's go, Alice." When I get back to the funeral home and unload Mrs. Smith from the van, I did not have the same difficulty moving her from the gurney to the lift as I had back in her room. She moved normally for her size and shape. I got her in the refrigerator and put her name on the door. And as I was filling out her intake paperwork, when I heard the music from the garage, my immediate conclusion was that my phone was in the van and started playing music on its own somehow, as I had it plugged into the stereo on the way in. I stood up and went to go grab and turn it off, but two things happened as soon as I crossed the threshold into the garage. One, the music suddenly stopped. Two, I had reached into my pocket and felt my phone there, silent. And at this point, I just rolled my eyes, ready to get home and get back to bed. The next day, I came into the office and saw Mrs. Smith's pre-need file on the front desk. On the index tab, it said Smith, Ruth. But when I opened it to the info sheet, it was noted very clearly that she preferred to be called by her middle name, Alice. Anyway, I know it's not a real ghost story per se, but just a weird bunch of little things in a row. But there you have it. What do you guys think of that story? I like it. I feel like sometimes subconsciously when you have that feeling or when you see something, you kind of get the hint in the room, kind of like reading the room without anything or anyone being in there. Let me see what the comments say. So I'm going in the comments. OP, who deleted their comment, posted to that 2 years ago, saying, "Thank you for sharing. I'm a little sad to learn those things don't happen all the time, but it is fun to hear about." Someone else underneath that says, "I wonder if it's something like a cemetery. I always wondered why people investigate cemeteries, because if indeed we can go anywhere to haunt, why would the spirit hang around in a cold, dark cemetery? Maybe you get much less activity in the funeral homes because the spirit has already moved to where they want to go." That's good. Good thought. Never thought about that. As I go through Reddit and I look up stories more so on like the mortician work side, it is very common that they say that spooky things, paranormal things don't really happen. Sometimes weird and odd experiences, but nothing out of the norm. Okay, so our next story comes from a website called Course of Horror, and it was posted October 31st of 2019 by an Evan Carter. I don't know if that's a real person or not, but let's dive into this one. Prior to starting school here at Michigan, I worked a few odd jobs. One such job was as a night shift nursing assistant for an ICU. In the ICU, we generally kept the sickest patients in the hospital. These were people who could be in recovery after having intensive surgery, or just needed to be continuously monitored because they were at risk of a health scare. This ICU had 12 rooms with one nurse assigned to each, and one nurse's aide, that's me, assigned to each of them. One of the perks of the night shift was that things were much slower as opposed to the day shift, because most patients slept during the night. Unfortunately, however, this also meant a reduction in the number of nurses and nurses' aides during your shift, so the nurse's aide might find themselves performing jobs alone. During my job interview, I was warned by my supervisor that one of my responsibilities was to take the deceased patients, slide them into a body bag, toe tag them, and put them on the metal stretcher and throw a dark blue tarp over the body. On this night in particular, I was scheduled alone, and we were relatively short-staffed. One of my patients was not doing well. We had given CPR twice already, and we were only 4 hours into my shift. At about 2 a.m. that morning, the patient's blood pressure dropped and passed away. I cleaned the body up so that when the family arrived, they could say their goodbyes and went back to work elsewhere. The time eventually came for the body to be transported downstairs. The entire hospital at this time was extremely busy. We sometimes called a transporter to take the body down, but they had been backed up for 2 hours, and being that it is against hospital protocol to keep a deceased body in a room for a certain amount of time before a new patient arrives, we wanted to get this done as soon as possible. Being the arrogant 22-year-old strongman that I was, I volunteered to do it. After the family left, I bagged the body, put a tag on it, and head down to the morgue. In the basement, I retrieved a specialized cart for the deceased body using the utility elevators. I run back upstairs, slide the body onto the cart, and head back to that same elevator. I would be lying if I said I wasn't scared shitless, but all of my favorite nurses were working, and I really wanted to help out. I had always felt weird transporting bodies in the hospital because you run the risk of running into a visitor. You are required to use certain elevators out of the public eye to move the body, because who wants to ride in an elevator with a corpse, right? I pushed the body into this giant elevator in the stock room and hit the button for the basement. Strangely, the elevator stalls, and instead of going down to the bottom floor, it jumps up 2 floors to the 4th floor to the newborn nursery. The B was still highlighted on the elevator, and I figured maybe someone just hit the button before I had forced the elevator up. I repeatedly pressed the B button again, and the doors closed. The elevator goes down to the 2nd floor, stops, travels down to the basement, stops once more without the doors opening, and then travels right back up to the 4th floor, where the doors open once more. The elevator does this 2 more times. Having seen enough scary movies in my lifetime, I ended up staying on the 4th floor, calling my charge nurse and telling her I don't feel comfortable putting this body in the morgue alone. After about 5 minutes, she runs up, explains to me that this elevator isn't even supposed to travel to the 4th floor without a key. And during her rounds of the hospital at around 7 p.m., she had used this same elevator and it had been working perfectly. We eventually take the body down to the morgue and head back upstairs. We start telling everybody in the ICU what happened, and one of the nurses who had been caring for the patient brought up how the woman was actually a neonatal nurse during the 80s and was forced to go on disability due to her complications with MS. The 4th floor at this hospital was the neonatal floor, and she suggested that maybe the spirit of the deceased patient had been trying to go back to the job she once loved. That's the end of the story. And that was my closet. What did you guys think? Very short, but I liked it. Kind of eerie, but not too scary. Little light. Odd experience. So, speaking of odd experiences, I want to know if any of you guys have had anything of the sort. Doesn't matter where. At work, at school, maybe at a family funeral or a friend funeral. Just wanting to know. I've had a few experiences myself growing up, but I'll save that for another time. Maybe make a whole episode on it. And if you guys have any themes that follow paranormal encounters or just like some stories or anything, if you have any themes, let me know. I do accept any and everything Halloween 365 days.
Hi friends, thanks for joining me on my podcast today. I was hoping to have 3 stories for you, but unfortunately the 3rd story just was not having it. So that story was the last story for this podcast. So we'll save story number 3 for next week. But I'm glad you tuned in. I'm glad you joined me. And of course, and as always, we're just going to build this up from the ground up. It's going to get a little better. The setup will be better. Audio quality, everything. It's just a work in progress with the space I have right now. But stay tuned, subscribe, follow me on Instagram, follow me on TikTok, and have a great day.